Welcome to another Love Ignites piece out of the bathtub chat for a podcast chat this month on the book A Love Letter Life by Audrey and Jeremy Roloff. We are so excited to be joining everyone again for another book club discussion. We absolutely have so much fun on these chats, and we hope that you guys do too. So with that said, let's get started. Does anybody have any stories, a brief little checkup they want to share?
Based on the last book, which I didn't give a great rating, we were all kind of lukewarm about the book. But I do have to say, I didn't procrastinate on reading this next book. And I always joke that I'm the founding father of procrastination nation on task-oriented things. I usually finish the book, I will be honest, the day of book club.
It's fresh in your mind, Jenna.
Exactly. So that's why I kept telling myself. I finished the book 3 days ago, and I had the questions up in front of me, and I'm ready to go.
Go, Virgo. Go, Virgo.
Darian is all prepared too. That's amazing.
Yeah, I would actually say I think I felt so much guilt over not being part of the last podcast that I was like, okay, I'm not going to overdo it, but I'm definitely going to be prepared.
I love it.
I usually order and actually read a real book, which I prefer. This one, I listen to it on Audible. It's not my favorite way of absorbing a book. I am glad this one was an Audible, and we'll vote on that later, the rating.
But, wait, Teresa, I was reading other ratings on the book on Goodreads, and I read another review that the co-authors actually narrated their own book, right? On Audible. So you listen to it through their voices. That would be interesting.
It was light and easy.
I also listened to it, and I loved how they read it. It was just one of those perfect books to have on Audible, in my opinion, because it was their own story, which was kind of cool. Like Audrey would read, and then Jeremy would read.
Mm-hmm. That was probably the best highlight for me of the book.
Well, I think we should jump right in. We are missing Noelle tonight. She is sick. We wish her well and hope she gets well very, very soon. But we're already easing into the book here. So let's give a quick summary of the book. The book that we read was A Love Letter Life by Jeremy and Audrey Roloff, which this one is a little unusual kind of pick, I think, for our normal Love Ignites Peace stuff, but we are discussing the limitations in romantic relationships for the next couple of months, like how to overcome some of those limitations. So this fits right in with that topic. All right, a quick summary of the book. In the New York Times bestseller, A Love Letter Life, Jeremy and Audrey teach us that the moment you meet your potential spouse, you can start being intentional about shaping a beautiful love story, uniquely written for who God created you both to be. From health problems to emotional walls being separated by 1,000 miles, the couple faced countless obstacles in their dating relationship, but their unique approach to dating empowered them to write an uncommon love story and prepared them for married life. As beautiful as their wedding was, the Roloffs wanted to be intentional about preparing even more for their marriage. Told through Jeremy and Audrey's voices, A Love Letter Life tells a passionate and persevering story of relatable struggles, hard-learned lessons, practical tips, and devout commitment. In these pages, they give you the encouragement you need to stop settling for convenient relationships, take on tough topics, intentionally pursue a love story that never ends, and grow your love story while growing your family. All right, ladies, overall thoughts from everyone. Did you like the book? Did you not like the book? And I also want you to let everyone know if you ever watched the show that they were on, the reality show that they were on.
I did watch a few episodes, only because at certain times I watch pop culture. So I am glad I at least saw a few episodes and could understand some of their emotional struggles and where they were in their life.
I'm excited because I know you all are going to contradict my feelings and thoughts, which is totally good. We love that when that happens. I'm super curious to hear Jenna's thoughts as well, because we had texted at the beginning, but we haven't texted about it since we finished. So I don't know her concluding thoughts either. But I had actually read this book twice before. This is my third of this book. I love this book. I love the principles contained within the book. I do think it gets very Christian, and I can see how that would rub people in the wrong way. And I very much respect that, not saluting everyone's flags. I don't love the purity chapter, but what I love is the love letter life concept. The idea that love is not just a feeling that you have, it's an action that you create. It is the fruit that you grow by watering the tree. And that is what I love about this book. And it gives you actionable ways to pursue this love letter life. I love the principle of sharing that they talk about. I think that is such a beautiful concept. I know that, as they mentioned, of course, you still have your own things and your own interests, but imagine if you were really intentional about taking an interest in the thing that your person is super interested in, how that could bond you. If you love them, then there might be something in it for you to love. I could go on and on and on about all the little nuggets that I truly, truly love. And I probably have like 10 little audio clip recordings of things that I want to listen back to as a reminder in relationships. But I also think, counter to this, I would be curious, if you were married for 50 years, you probably wouldn't get much out of this book. Like, this is for those, in my opinion, that are single or newly dating. And I guess I don't have a perspective yet on if you had been in a relationship or marriage for a few years. But overall, I love the principle of the book, although I know it is not a perfect book. I also think it's actually pretty well written, and I loved listening to them read it to me. And I also follow them on social media, so I've liked them for a while as well. So those are my thoughts. And I'm sure I have more to come, but we'll just kick it off with that.
Coming off of the 8 rules, very much the same thing. One was a little more mature. And I thought his book was more mature in overall total concept. So maybe reading this book first and Jay Shetty's second would have been a nice building layering.
It's interesting to me that you brought the 8 rules of love up, Teresa, because I did have several moments in this book where I was thinking, oh, that really does connect back to the 8 rules of love. I thought it was written from such a different perspective as Jay Shetty's book. Jay Shetty's book is for every human being to read. I don't believe that this book is for every human being to read by any stretch of the imagination. And I had to read it from the perspective of what was I getting out of the core information about love, like the actions. What can you do action-wise to really work on this romantic relationship? Several of us on this podcast have Christian values, but it was very religious focused. So the good news for me is, I guess I've done this healing around some stuff with religion, and I could read it through a different lens than the lens that they were intending. I can bring a different perspective to it than the lens that they were intending with some of the religious stuff.
I want to second that really quickly, because I think that is what allows me to enjoy it so much. I think if I wasn't able to see the whole idea of keeping Christ in the center of your marriage from a perspective like, yeah, let's keep divinity, let's keep this higher power, let's keep this energy that's in us. If I couldn't see it from my perspective in that, I think that I would not enjoy it as much, especially if I had just been like kind of indoctrinated but not strong in my own personal spiritual and faith journey. So I think that's a good point.
I liked it. I thought it was cute. I thought it was definitely a light and lighthearted read, but I think understanding it from the perspective of the age they were and are when they wrote it. I think it's a great book for foundational romantic relationships. And what I mean by foundational is just the beginning. And I think the reason why I think it's great for that is because things we read about foundational romantic relationships only focus on the honeymoon phase. And I am a hopeless romantic just as much as the next person, but you think, yeah, like marriage only gets hard, or you only face trials like 50 years down the road. And having a lot of these tools, maybe a lot of us who kind of invest in self-help and spirituality maybe already know about the Enneagram. It's like kind of like that's old news, but for a lot of people, it's not. And when you're talking about people in their 20s and 30s, we're talking about people who just think of love as finding the one. And it's like this pursuit for the one. And it's everything's perfect and everything's flowery and rosy all the time. And you have to find someone who agrees with you on everything and has the exact same values and like has all of these components. And actually some of that you have to work on and massage. And like there's layers to romantic relationships that you have to peel back like an onion. And I think for that reason, it's really important for young people pursuing romantic relationships to read. I will say I didn't think the writing was great. I felt like it was really choppy and some of it felt kind of rushed, almost like they were trying to like hit a deadline for their like book release kind of thing. When I first opened up the beginning, I was like, oh my gosh, I love this. I love chapter 1 and how it was written. I thought it was cute and sweet. And then some of it later felt a little bit more rushed. So I liked all of that. I loved the principle of sharing, which some of that sounds like a no-brainer, but I think for some people in the beginning, like I even had this perspective. I want someone who has all of these same hobbies and likes all of these same things, and they need to like check these boxes. And really when it comes down to like building a relationship, it is an action. It is, you know, choosing someone, of course, choosing a compatible person and working on that. Parts I didn't like about it, the purity chapter was in, but I really didn't like the part about him giving up a friendship with a female. I really didn't like that at all, actually, because I have a lot of male friends that are like brothers to me, that we have friendships that go back to our childhood. And I think that's totally okay. Like my boyfriend's okay with that. We hang out one-on-one when they're in town. Like there were parts of it that felt a little bit controlling, which part was part of like the immaturity phase of it. But that probably is why it's important to read these, and maybe they'll change their perspective on that later in life. But there were some great nuggets and some stuff where I could do without that part.
It all boils down really with everything we're reading. It's really, where are you with self? How trusting are you with yourself? How vulnerable are you with yourself? What are your boundaries? The more you can trust and love yourself, everything else is a lot easier. Doesn't mean it's going to be perfect. Maybe marriages won't work. Maybe boyfriends and girlfriends break up, but you're still with you. That's really, I think, what they were trying to say is they were trying to find themselves to be able to be vulnerable enough to build a good relationship. That's where I thought their journey was in this themselves.
You might have already had your mic drop moment. We're only 15 minutes in, Teresa.
I don't know. That was just my perspective.
No, I absolutely love that. And I actually just was walking on the treadmill with a friend the other morning, and we usually get on and put in our headphones and do our respective audiobook listening or music listening. And I was like, I'm sorry, I have to interrupt. I need to talk about this. And she's like, okay. I said, I love the perspective that they're bringing to this concept of the one, how there's not really a one. And that one I have struggled with, because we are inundated culturally that there's this one person out there for you. There's this Prince Charming, there's this great love. And I do believe in great love 100%. And the hopeful romantic in me still wants to find the one. But the greatest love relationships that I have seen in my life, they will tell you that, yes, that person is the one, but not just because they're soul, it's because they've worked at it, they've chosen. And that's what I love about what Audrey and Jeremy talked about. We came together and we shared this foundation of beliefs and values and things we could build our life on. And then the day I said I do, they became the one. I did really, really like that. And it takes the pressure off of this concept of it having to be just some like magical fairy tale, and grounds it in a little more reality. Do I like you? Do you like me? Do we have the similar foundation to create a love letter life? Because I do think that people so often get caught up in the feeling, and love at that stage is a cocktail, a chemical cocktail in your brain. That is science. In my personal experiences, I have experienced love, but it wasn't necessarily with the right person. It wasn't necessarily like the great love that I was looking for, but I could have just followed the feeling and let go of all of the things that I knew were foundational to like creating that love letter life. Like that would have fizzled, that cocktail would have gone away, and like life would have happened, and we wouldn't have had a lot to stand on. But I'm just truly super appreciative of how they, as two people that have one of the most, what appears to be healthy, strong marriages, aren't just being like, well, we just found the one and that was that. It's like, okay, well, how does one do that?
No, I agree with that. And I think you're explaining it super well. Sure, there are more mature people who have years of marriage who could probably have like better advice, but I liked that they were trying to set themselves up for success rather than making it about just like this fairy tale day. We're gonna hit peaks and valleys. How are we gonna make these promises and set these pieces in motion so that when we do get to a valley, we can deal with it? And I don't think a lot of people in their 20s and 30s are thinking about it. They're waiting until it gets hard, and then it's like, what do I do? And then they're looking for every resource under the book. So I did appreciate that perspective a lot. I didn't watch the show really. My mom is a TLC lover, 90 Day Fiance. She definitely watched Little People Big World, all of the shows. So I would see bits and pieces. But then I did look them up on Instagram. I like their Instagram presence, but I did think it was cool that they talked sometimes in detail about their struggles having as much of a public presence as they do, because that's really hard to be that vulnerable. And they could have easily gone out with the full, this person's the one. They talked about some like stuff where it's very vulnerable to write about. With their public presence, I commended them for that.
Part of what makes for them particularly successful thus far, everyone that is in their circle, their friends were calling checks and balances on them. Their counselors were calling checks and balances on them. Not to paint a broad stroke, but most people under 30, your friends are a reflection of what you're kind of doing. So there's no foundation to hold you accountable to say, have those conversations, come in for counseling. They don't have that.
We do need to hear from Darian, and I think it's important that we hear from her.
So the one thing that I really did enjoy about this book was intention. Every day we wake up with intention, whether it be within ourselves, within our relationship, being romantic, work, friendship, we wake up with intention. And that is the one thing that I found to be the everlasting piece of this book. What I did not enjoy about this book, for me, it was a lot of trigger words, which is really guilt and shame. It is so, every time we did this, or every time we like, oh, maybe I touched your booby, and it was like guilt and shame. And I was like, well, hell. And for me specifically, this, for those who listen to how I felt about the Sarah Beef book, this falls under that for me. Like,
oh, no,
I actually
got
something. I will rip this up on podcast over this book. I felt like it did not create the unity in which I believe the movement of Love Ignites pieces. I did not find this book to be in line with what we're doing. Yeah, not my jam at all. Again, there were some great nuggets that I did get out of it. Really, the purity one, actually. There's a section in there where they're talking about, in the Bible, purity means to be morally clean without blemish. Pursuing purity essentially means to pursue holiness with our minds, hearts, and bodies. To be pure means to be guiltless, blameless, and innocent. To believe that God's way are the best ways and to walk into them. And when we walk into purity, we are wholly available to God, ready to be used to accomplish his purposes. Then it goes into like, you know, if you've done things sexually and so on and so forth. But right before that chapter, which by the way is on page 128, second from the bottom, but it says, I think Christians especially have overhauled virginity and undervalued purity. I found that to be very profound. It's really understanding purity has a lot to do with intention. So to kind of wrap that back around to the beginning of this, what I loved about this book is that it was their intention to have love, to create love, and to continue love. But outside of that,
Darian throws the book. Oh my goodness.
Thank you for sharing that though, Darian. Like, seriously, thank you for being so vulnerable. And I think what you just said was an amazing perspective and analysis of the book.
I definitely second that. I think that's a really profound and important perspective to bring to the table. Jenna and I are coming from a much younger, not much younger.
Down girl, down girl.
I was like, good grief. I mean, Lord help me.
You all have lived life. You guys have lived more life. You've gone through more experiences. You've had more relationships. You've been married. Like, there are things that you guys have done that we have not done that I think can bring an entirely different and important perspective to the table. And so I just really appreciate what you shared. And I do think that's a big problem sometimes with the religious culture, is the guilt and shame. That's my number one issue with it, is the guilt and shame that it brings onto people. And I'm so bummed to hear that that is brought forward for you, but I think that's a really important thing for people to hear.
I will honestly tell you, Lord knows, I hope I don't ever have to go back into the dating scene, because you guys have to experience the amount of stress. I do not envy that, but I do say I will send you all of the unemployed angels. Ladies, yikes, I can't. If this is the path, do it, because there's not a real book. Yes, we read 8 Rules of Love, and I mean, you guys know what that book is to me.
Tattoos.
For those who are listening, there is no right or wrong. In saying right or wrong, there is this purity section. And I strongly ask you to just focus on that piece. Purity does not mean virginity. And I think that was probably the most powerful piece that came out of this, that allowed you to forgive yourself and to be forgiven, especially if that is the faith that you have.
So this is what's blowing my mind super quickly. The reason I'm like, I don't like the purity chapter is because I don't want anyone to feel any guilt or shame. And I have for many years lived my life in that purity mindset in a lot of ways. And so I don't want anyone to feel guilt or shame. That's why I'm like, skip the chapter. You did nothing wrong. Like, it's okay. You're not bad. You're still whole. But I love that you are literally saying that from the flip side of that, actually, there's such a gift in the nugget of the purity versus virginity.
100%. It's somewhere a little bit later that it actually talks about that. It kind of talks about guilt and shame, and that can be cleansed, that can be washed.
I think the really interesting thing about this book is it is so dependent on the lens of perspective that you bring to this book. Of all the books we've read, this one in particular, it's going to polarize. I know in conversations with Noelle briefly, she said, oh God, that purity chapter was ridiculous. It was so yesterday, right?
Dang it.
So
I wish she was
1800s. Right, exactly. But it's just such a testament to what is your perception? What is the lens that you bring to this book and any book that you read? But this one in particular, it's really going to magnify your perception.
Absolutely. We've had this conversation probably every podcast. And for me, faith is something that I've always envied quite a bit. And going through this, and they were able to make great references to the Bible and give you places to go look and things like that. They had that faith, which again, super envious of. But again, their faith also continues that separation. It creates that gap for people. And I felt like we kind of missed the mark choosing this book because it didn't feel inclusive. I think it gave you like another way to look at something, and maybe that was it. It was a challenge of what we're doing, but I didn't feel that growth. I felt judgment from this. And what I personally lean into is growth and being better. And I was not with this.
We touched on this earlier, but the perspective that I got out of it was more of this idea of love as an action. And even though that love is a feeling, really to be successful in a romantic relationship, love as an action really has to be a focus.
Absolutely. And again, I'm going to revert back to the very first thing I said in this, which is intention. You have to intend to wake up in the morning. You have to intend to go to work. You have to intend to engage with these relationships. It's all about intention. But what you have to commend them on is their creativity with the struggles that they have. Separation, physical desires. I mean, I'm sure there's a couple more and I can't think of them off the top of my head, but yeah.
I just had a quote that I feel like was a good nugget that encompassed love as an action, which I think was a big part that I got out of the book too. This is on page 90 for my Kindle. It says, unfortunately, the expectation that relationships just happen doesn't end in kindergarten. Our generation is being fed a false doctrine about love. The media of today have most of us believing that love is serendipitous, something that happens by chance. They portrayed love as merely an emotion that we fall into and out of. All of this has made us so infatuated with the idea of falling in love that we lost sight of what love really is: a choice, a verb, a commitment, a promise. And I thought that was really profound. And I think that goes way beyond romantic relationships and ties back to love as an action in all relationships.
One other really, really fast thing that I liked what you said as well, Darian, is how they were really good at citing things biblically. So if you are someone that truly connects with the Bible, they do an incredible job of pointing towards places in the Bible that supports the theories, the concepts, the things that they're sharing. And actually that was impactful to me about the one that we were talking about earlier, because they're like, there is no biblical reference to the one. And my jaw about hit the floor. I was like, what? So like we as a society just made that up kind of thing in our own cultural mores. Everyone's opinions of that are different as well, but taking it from the lens that they were sharing, I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah. All right, let's get on to one question at least tonight. We'll see what we I don't know that we've ever had such a long discussion about whether we like or dislike the book at the beginning of the podcast. Page 33. Until Audrey, I had never met someone who held a mirror to my life just by being herself. The light in her life showed me not only who I was, but who I wanted to be. How has that mirror manifested in your own romantic relationships? Were you able to see that mirror in your relationships as you read this book?
For me, it gave me a moment to reflect, but I don't have those exact same thoughts. I have gratitude for where we are. I have gratitude for what we've done, and I have hope for what we will be. That statement for me was a pressure. That's how I found that to be. It doesn't feel authentic, I guess. It's a cute little piece.
Well, I found my romantic relationship to be the greatest mirror I've ever had in my life, but it was not necessarily a mirror of, oh, I'm great, oh, I'm wonderful. It was more a mirror of, oh gosh, guess I don't believe that I'm enough, because it's being reflected back to me that I'm not enough. So I didn't find it to be a mirror of great things. And, you know, I like this idea. I like this concept of who do I want to be, but I need to feel safe with my partner in them supporting who I want to be. I think that's really an important concept, like a differentiation, because there can also be the manipulation aspect of it. This is who I need you to be. This is who you ought to be. This is who I want you to be. And if you're not that kind of thing. So I think there's a really fine line with this.
Absolutely. 100%. I really struggled with that question.
I mean, I would agree with the mirror thing. I don't know if the mirror always means a direct reflection of the great things too, but I've always looked at, for example, recently, Rebecca Boatman, we had a podcast with her 2 weeks ago, and she was the lady that I did the relationship coaching with. And I just watched one of her Instagram videos. And she's like, if you're showing up with a partner who's not being emotionally available to you, are you emotionally available? It doesn't sound groundbreaking, but I was like, oh my gosh, wait, that's actually a great point. Am I actually open? Is my heart actually open? And so I think these little nuggets of reflection, the concept of the mirror can be a great foundation to create a little reflection, but you have to do it from this healthy, grounded place of like knowing who you are and being able to say, oh yeah, actually I do need to look into that, or nope, I'm actually okay on that. But I think that we can just kind of look at a behavior and see if we're reflecting that. Is there a reason that someone is getting defensive? Are we perhaps defensive? Is there a reason that someone is withdrawn? Are we causing that? Are we withdrawn? What are we mirroring? I think it's a really, really important thing for us to just use a little takeaway to keep in mind.
All right, let's move on to the next question. This was obviously a very Christian-based book. On page 55, the best way to love your boyfriend, girlfriend, or spouse is to love God first. How do you think spirituality should play out in a romantic relationship? And what do you think about the idea of putting God first, or even the concept of bringing God into the bedroom?
There's a joke with God in the bedroom because, hey, oh God, we say it. Just saying, girls. So he's in the bedroom or she's in the bedroom a lot. Let's just be honest.
Teresa with her second.
There you go.
Her second
There,
mic
come
drop.
on, Darren, you know what I'm talking about. But on a more serious note, in whatever your faith practice would be, the underlying core is we are ourselves God. So to put one over the other, we're a whole being. Why would we separate? Just a thought.
The perspective that I bring to it now after all these years, I mean, I would have never in my early life thought about necessarily even God that strong in our romantic relationship, or especially God in the bedroom. Not the way that you were thinking about it, Teresa. But I think that for me, the core is to see the divinity that resides in every human being, and to especially be able to see the divinity that resides in the person that I love deeply as my partner. And Teresa and I read this book months ago where it referred to the partner as the beloved companion. And so she and I are both on our way to find a beloved companion. Truly, like beloved.
Yeah.
God is there.
I love that.
My perspective on it is, well, I think background for me is important. So I grew up, my family's Catholic, Creaster Catholic, only goes to church on Christmas and Easter. I would call myself loosely Christian. My image of God is a Christian-based God, but I'm a picker and a chooser of what resonates with me. So I was really proud of myself reading this book because I have come so far, and like I'm so content with the way I've picked and chosen my spirituality and what resonates with me and what I can just toss out, because some of this would have made me feel guilty when I was younger, and I feel like I've tossed out all of that dogma. So this was really great for me to read to reflect how far I've come on that. From just a general perspective, I do think it is really important to put something at the core of your relationship that's bigger than yourself, that's bigger than yourself as an individual, bigger than your partner, and bigger than whatever fluttery emotions that you feel together. But I think that can be defined in so many different ways. For example, like Martin and I, even just since reading the book about the angels, we started talking about that more in our relationship. And we'll just talk about angels all the time. And it's like this thing that transcends us as human beings, our relationship, just having something that's a part of our relationship that's bigger than either of us. And I do think that's really important. However you identify, I think having something that's not of this world, if that makes sense. And I think love is one of those things, just the principle of love, having something that's bigger than yourselves as a core principle of your relationship is important. And I resonate with that.
Jenna, I just think that was so beautifully said. I'd stand up and give you a round of applause or drop a mic or whatever.
I 100% agree with that. When you asked that question, I took it very literal. And my response was like, I think that's an insane act. Specifically when you said, what do you think about the idea of putting God first? We have spent so much time, so much energy in putting the focuses on us, forgiving ourselves and working to be better, stronger, all of that every day. And this book took it for me and was like, we're going to do all that. We're going to put it all to face. I'm like, cool. So I'm going to go stand out in the middle of the freeway and pray I don't get hit. Sounds good. Jenna, I honestly will tell you, what you said just took that entire thing out for me, because my reasoning for being a part of not only book club, but embracing Love Ignites Peace has been this personal path, this engagement of leaning into the maybes and all of that. And faith is also a chance. So thank you. Jenna. For those of you, go back 45 seconds to 2 minutes, re-listen to Jenna.
Wow, thanks, guys.
Wow. We'll just put you on repeat, Jenna. All right, last question, and then I would like to get to favorite passage. So this was a question from a listener, Georgia in Centennial. The first part of the book was all about pursuit. What is your opinion on this idea of pursuit? When is pursuit healthy and when is it unhealthy?
Communication. As long as you're communicating and it is accepted. When it is a conversation, absolutely. But when it's this person's doing this and this is being ignored, or this person's doing this and it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, this book really helped me reframe some ideas around pursuit. Both my mom and Jenna were like, Ashlyn, you need to start the book. You need to start the book. Because I had a scenario playing out in my life around my expectations versus his expectations. I just like this idea of building that friendship and not having to rush into it, but it goes to exactly what you said, Jerry. You have to be on the same page. That's what's important. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't have worked if Jeremy was like, but I need you to date me today. And Audrey was like, wow, 2 years away from that. Like, I need you to cool it. But because there was this patient pursuit that they both were willing to get on the same page about, it was possible. And that was really eye-opening for me. I'm not always the most patient.
I personally think one of the most important messages in this book is building the foundation, and how they did that through this patient pursuit is what they called it.
Jenna and I have also talked about this before. There's such a societal pressure and norm. Again, going back to this idea of the one, that you're supposed to meet someone and just be like, head over heels, done, I'm ready, let's run to the altar. And I do think sometimes that happens, and I love that for people. There's no shame in that. But what if, again, building your love letter life actually takes some time in being intentional in who you choose and in building that foundation to then create what could be an even better fairy tale, an even happier, happy ever after, because you have taken those steps in pursuing each other.
And to your point, that for our generation and the generation younger than ours, Ashlyn, that whole concept is not going away. It's doubling down in movies, and Instagram is the biggest culprit, because now we're seeing real people's lives, someone we went to high school with, their cousin's brother is like perfect relationship, and you're comparing to what seems real. And yes, we know at some level all of this is curated and people are showing their best moments, but for me, that added a lot of layer of complexity in this journey of romantic relationships, because you're comparing to literal people that you know who are everyday Joes. I think that this is a good base level book for that part. But then 8 Rules of Love definitely builds upon that in a stronger way.
Well, throwing that back to what you just said about social media, I had forgotten that Audrey and Jeremy had such a long courtship or such a long friendship that built into the relationship. Again, with the programming and what I've accepted as like my cultural social mores, I would have looked at them and been like, oh, they must have just met each other and been the one and been so in love, and it must have just happened. And so this was such a good reminder to see a role model, to see a relationship that you truly think has what you're looking for, and to hear that the foundation wasn't a straight line.
They broke up too. I think that's a big thing. You're never seeing that on social media. You're never seeing when people are at the altar. It's not, well, we broke up a couple times in between, but we have a lot of hardships that we've overcome, but we made it. You're seeing like, this is the happiest day of my life, and it should be one of the happiest days of your life, a wedding or those milestones. But it's like, okay, that's leaving out a lot of the story. So for our generation, I do wish everyone luck, because it's rough.
Well, it's so hard because we're just so inundated with the idea of fairy tales. And even this idea of pursuit is kind of a fairy tale-ish concept, depending on how you look at it. We need to get real with this stuff. We need to learn that what we're seeing is really fantasy, it's fiction, it's not real life, and it's not how it really works.
I really liked where you were going with the idea that sometimes even pursuit seems fairy tale-ish. Like, you highlight the high levels of the really good things that happen. But I do think what Audrey said in the book about Jeremy's not rare. That's an important thing for us to also understand. Yeah. That is so huge. And again, referring back to Rebecca Boatman and following some of her stuff, like one of the most common beliefs that she hears women say is, there's just not enough good men out there. And we have to change that perspective too. There are Jeremys, if you're willing to, as Teresa said, have that sense of self and that sense of self-love, that you can hold yourself to this place that you know that will come and meet you, and you can trust that that's out there and love yourself enough to find that.
It's all about beliefs at that point and manifestation.
But then it can be a fairy tale. I mean, he wrote her letters. That's so sweet. That pursuit did have a little fairy tale-esque to it. But there was a lot of realness in there too, which, to Jenna's point about them being stars basically and sharing a lot of those, that was really cool.
All right. Did you guys have a favorite passage from the book?
Sorry, I don't have really one to share.
I'm like so excited to hear what you rate this book, Teresa, because I can't get. I know.
It's fine.
So my favorite was definitely like the purity side of it.
Knocked me over with a feather, Darian. I would have never ever thought that. I skipped a chapter mostly, honestly.
Honestly, I was a little nervous because there'd been a couple conversations about the purity chapter, and I was like, oh hell, well, that one's out the window. I actually like spent time and I actually like sat on it, and when that particular part came up, I was just like, guys, this is literally the best part of this book, because they've built this whole foundation, they've done this, and then they're going, hey, purity isn't the things, right?
I read mine about just love as an action, basically.
I had that one as one of my favorite passages, Jenna.
I gotta say, I highlighted a good amount in this book. On the social media topic, I thought this one was a good one too. It says, I believe that the overuse of social media is posing a massive threat to our love stories. It can be a tempting place to zone out, escape, or invite wandering eyes. It can allow comparison to steal the joy that our love stories were meant to experience. It can steal our time, causing it to spend more of it scrolling feed. Just the idea of comparison that I already mentioned. I thought it was good that they touched on that, because I think we think about comparison in a lot of ways on social media, but it's not talked about a ton in terms of relationships, as far as I've seen.
I'm curious if anybody looked up the definition of purity.
I actually did not. It was actually in that same paragraph that I had read. And so I was basing like my opinion off of that. But that's where I was like, I like that.
Might want to look up the definition. It's interesting. We've just talked a lot about purity. I just wondered if anybody looked up the definition. That's all. Not a big deal.
No, I want to hear. Tell us the definition. Keep going, because I feel like this is really, really important.
There's many. Purity, freedom from immorality, especially of a sexual nature, freedom from adulteration, contamination. I just found the definition of purity and how they used it so much in the book. It kind of rubbed me a little bit. That's all.
I love that concept. I mean, mine, again, was based off of what they were talking about in the book.
Freedom from guilt or evil, physical chastity, virginity, freedom from foreign or inappropriate elements.
See, I think that's what's important about definition from the book, is that they try to be really intentional to delineate between the general definitions of purity. They made their own within the context of what they were trying to convey. They separated between virginity and purity.
They did, but actually, they said in the Bible, purity means to be morally clean without blemish. That is what their definition of purity is.
That is completely subjective. I mean, the way they're talking about it, maybe not subjective, but I think purity is subjective personally. I think it does go back to intention and what your intentions are. If you're approaching things in life with malintention or the intention to hurt people, or you're coming from a place of jealousy, I'm not talking about purity in the religious context here at all. But I think the pursuit of purity in that definition, the one I'm talking about, is important. I think the other one, I threw that. That was not one that I was picking up with my choices of what I was picking and choosing from.
You know, I had done a lot of writing in the last few years, specifically about love. And I had written this chapter for another book that I've been working on. And I used the word purity in there when I was describing love. And then my editor read it and she's like, do you really want to use purity? Because I think purity has a lot of there's a lot of triggers for people in the word purity. But as I was using that word and using it as I was discussing love, I mean, I was thinking about pure from the sense of all the goodness that you could possibly imagine, like a clear mountain stream that is just refreshing and beautiful and cleansing. I was just writing about love in its purest form. You guys could fill in the blanks with that, but it kind of goes back to like all those words that are filled with good that we talked about from Loving Knight's Peace, Our Next Evolution. Positivity,
Abundance, kindness.
abundance.
Yeah.
Right. All those words. So it's your lens of perception again. And this book can be very triggering to someone's lens of perception.
They can, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Did you have a favorite passage, Lenny?
I had several, but because I listened to it on audiobook, I couldn't quite get down to read it.
No.
But a concept that we haven't touched on yet, but would have had one of my favorite quotes in, is the love is not an island. And I think that that is such an important concept, that if you do have trusted people in your life, listen to them, invite them to your island of love, and help that be a nurturing, encouraging part of your relationship, because I will tell you the people closest to you know you. And if they don't like someone you're with, as long as they're a healthy person, it's not because they're jealous. It's not because they're trying to sabotage you. It's because they're genuinely concerned. And I think that we get this idea of the wife, we get this concept of you have to find your partner for life, and oh my gosh, this is your number one priority. And we start to just shut everything else out. And I have seen that actually be really harmful for some people. And it's such a bummer when that happens, because I feel like if you're with the right partner, and Jenna and I talk about this because with her and Martin, Martin's family is her family and her family is Martin's family now. They are one and they all love each other. And that is such an amazing situation. And I know that that's not what everyone has as their background, but love is not an island. Truly listen to those around you that love you. They will help guide you if you are on the right path, or if perhaps someone is dimming your light or bringing you down.
And so from that, I will read my one sentence that was one of my favorite passages. And that is, it's apparent that feelings of love don't last without the actions of love. And I would add to that, the choice of love. You have to make the choice. When you look at Jenna's family and Martin's family, like they've chosen to love each other.
And if nobody else in your life likes the person that you're with romantically, that's like the biggest red flag on God's green earth. But if the people who have known you for longer than anyone you're welcoming in romantically are all kind of like, you sure about this? Not a good sign.
I actually had someone ask me the other day, they said, would it be a deal breaker for you if your family didn't like the guy you were with? And I said, unequivocally, without a doubt, yes, yeah. That would be a deal breaker. Yeah. Because my people know me and they love me and they want what's best for me, and they're not the kind of people that are going to sabotage something that's healthy for me. They're going to support it. They will only say something that's really not good. So it's a deal breaker. And the other one that's interesting was another deal breaker we were talking about, is something that was earlier with the God question. I do want to be with someone that has faith in a higher power, because that is how I approach so much of my life, and deal with conflict, deal with hard days, deal with, on the reciprocal side of things, like being in the flow and setting up the space. And like you said about you and Martin, calling in the angels, all of these different things. It's such a big piece of my life. That's a deal breaker too.
I actually have kind of a piece of advice that I found was really important, and I wish I had kind of known this. I'm going to read it exactly from the book, but it can go both ways, which is a word to the single guys out there. If you are pursuing a woman who is hard to catch, don't give up. It means she has standards, and she isn't about to fall for just any guy with a smartphone who sends her heart emojis. If you're serious about wanting a lifelong relationship with this woman, your patient pursuit is part of what qualifies you as husband material. So that is a piece of advice for my young ones to take seriously. I think that's incredibly important.
All right, Darian, what do you rate this book?
0.
Trash can. 0.
Done.
Okay.
Sarah Beek, I think, actually got a star. That? No. Done.
I don't understand. I feel like you had some good takeaways. I thought it was at least a 1.5.
Yeah, I'm really confused too. You just read like all these passages and all these things that is lightened.
There are some great things, but no, I would never recommend this. I cannot wait for winter season. I will take a photo. We will post this on the website. This is not a recommendable book. Sorry.
You're cracking me up. I think you dislike Sarah Bink's book more than this, so I'm just really confused.
You're hilarious.
Teresa, how would you rate this book?
I feel that anybody that can sit down and put words to paper, have something within them that they want to share, I'm going to give it a half a point for that.
Oh my gosh, 0.5.
It's on my phone, so I don't even know what to do with it. I don't know how to get it off my phone. Sorry, I wouldn't put it in my book of library for people downstairs at meditation to check out. I wouldn't recommend it. Even if you're 20, I think it immature.
Your rating doesn't surprise me. You didn't really have much to say about the book and really didn't like any part of it. So I'm not surprised by your rating.
I'm going to go with my original answer. I was getting swayed by the crowd and I was going to go down. I'm giving it a 3.75, which is oddly specific, but I didn't feel like it deserved the B at the 4, but we're almost there. So I'm giving it a 3.75. And that's my honest answer. That's the number I had going in.
I did agree with you, Jenna. I didn't think the writing was all that great. I always struggle with that initially. When I read a book, I'm like, oh. So that was a little something for me that I had to kind of deal with at the beginning, was getting over the writing. But I'm going to give it a 3 because I think there is good inspiration for some. And I also think that other people will be really turned off by this book. And it's just the Christian thing, I think, for the most part. And I do agree, Teresa, this is a young love.
My grandson is 19. He's had a girlfriend and relation. I would not recommend this book to my 19-year-old son. There are much more broader, intentful teaching, sharing books I would recommend for him.
I really like what you just said, Teresa. And between you and Paige, you just prompted a question for me, which is, do you think if it had been written from one perspective, which is what 8 Rules of Love was done, versus both of their perspectives, that this potentially could have changed how we engaged with this book?
I actually think it would have made this book worse.
Really?
I don't know why I think that, but I think that.
Yeah, I don't know about that question.
I think because they were so limited in how they saw the world and how they saw the relationship that I can't imagine even making that more narrow with one voice.
I was just going to say, I think it is a good book to recommend to a teenager. Well, there's 2 things. I think if you are still sorting out your beliefs or you're triggered by Christianity or anything like that, I would not recommend reading this at all. I think if you're starting out, maybe even perhaps if you are a male, it's a good foundational book, because I don't know a 19-year-old boy, especially, who's going to be able to sit down and digest. I don't know. I think even though they are limited in their perspective and there's this air of immaturity, their air of immaturity is nothing compared to what I'm seeing in the relationships of teenagers and young adults today. So I think that it's a good basis.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I'm not going to be swayed by the crowd. I'm giving it a 4.5 because I have read this book 3 times. And the nuggets that I have got out of this book, being a young person, really trying to figure out what the heck does romantic love look like, act like, walk like, talk like, what is it, has been really impactful to just unpack little points that I can take forward to create that foundation, to take pressure off this idea of the one, to listen to the advice that's around me from a very baseline, like young person perspective. I think it's a good starter book. But with the caveat, I'm giving that a 4.5, being someone that is not triggered by the Christian theme throughout the book. So I think that that's important to also note. So you are not triggered by the guilt and shame of it if that is something that really will impact you. But yeah, I stand by it. I've read it 3 times and I still get good nuggets out of it. I probably won't read it a 4th. I think I've got it now. I do think that the word immature is interesting because I don't feel like I'm an immature person. And I know that that's not what's being said about the book being immature. I am someone that has read, obviously, all the books that we read in this book club and ones beyond that in a higher way of living type space, type mentality. But sometimes it does help to take a step back from this like ethereal, higher perspective and just get a little bit grounded in like the reality of what it is that we're working with, what it is that we have going on in our daily life, and the reality of what it is like to date in your teens and 20s. So 4.5.
All right, what is it?
The 2.35.
We really brought up the average because the first half gave it a straight F-. They gave it a G if you could.
It is funny. I actually read this book for a book club with another group of ladies in our age group, and it was hilarious because it was also polarizing in that space as well. But again, it all goes back to what my mom has said about your lens of perception. The people that didn't like it, and I'm not saying that the same is in this group, but one of the girls that didn't like it has nothing to do with faith in her relationship. It's just like completely null and void. So of course she's not gonna like the idea that they should be braided strands with her man in Christ. Like that's really not gonna go together. But it is interesting how like some of it, some don't.
Ultimately, the most important is their story works for them.
I want to kind of get right behind you on that, Teresa, which is, I think a lot of the faith stories, they kind of get pushed down. They don't really get to kind of rise up with so many other love stories. There has to be a lot of credit given to that as well. All right, fine. It gets a half a star, whatever.
I mean, the average. It's not a 2.3 anymore. It's a 2.45.
With that said, thank you all so much for joining Book Club tonight. Thank you everyone for listening. We hope that you have an amazing rest of your week. And as always, get your freak on.